The first time Jim Carter touched Elena Morales, it wasn't with desire. It was with the rough, callous brush of hands passing a basket of peppers in the dark. Yet later, in the cellar with the storm howling above, he would remember that moment as the start of something far more dangerous than weather or loneliness. He would remember the warmth of her skin against his, the way the air thickened when silence carried more weight than words. But that was still weeks away. Now, standing at the edge of his farm under the harsh September sun, Jim only saw a stranger step down from the back of a labor contractor's truck. The red Oklahoma soil stretched endlessly under the September sun, row after row of pepper plants, heavy with fruit that needed harvesting before the first frost. At 62, Jim's back protested every morning when he rose from the narrow bed he'd slept in alone for 8 months now. The farmhouse felt too big, too quiet, echoing with the ghost of Martha's humming and the phantom scent of her cornbread cooling on the windowsill.
"You Jim Carter?"
The woman's voice carried a slight accent, warm but businesslike. He nodded, studying her face. Lines mapped the corners of her dark eyes, not from age alone, but from squinting against sun and hardship. Her clothes were practical worn jeans, a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat, sturdy boots that had seen plenty of fields.
"Elena Morales."
She extended a calloused hand. Her grip was firm, confident.
"I hear you need help with the harvest."
Jim had imagined hiring a young man, someone who could bend and lift without complaint, who would work silently and leave at sunset. He'd pictured keeping to himself, speaking only when necessary about tasks and payment. But Elena's presence shifted something in the air around his farm, like the change in pressure before a storm.
"The peppers need to come in fast,"
he said, gesturing toward the acres that rolled away from the farmhouse.
"Weather Service says we might see an early freeze next week."
"I've worked peppers before."
Elena shaded her eyes with one hand, scanning the neat rows.
"These look good. Healthy plants."
Pride flickered in Jim's chest. He'd been farming this land for 40 years, had coaxed life from the red earth, through droughts and floods, through years when the prices dropped so low. He'd wondered if he should sell everything and move to town. Martha had always believed in the farm, even when the bank payments stretched their budget thin.
"My wife used to help."
He found himself saying.
"She's been gone since January."
Elena's expression softened, but she didn't offer empty condolences.
"It's hard, working alone."
They walked between the rows as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Elena moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in fields, her trained eye assessing the crop. She paused occasionally to test a pepper's firmness or check the moisture in the soil.
"You'll want to start with the southeast section," she said. "Those are ripest. If we push hard tomorrow, we can get maybe 3 acres cleared before noon."
Jim blinked. Most seasonal workers waited for detailed instructions, nodded along without offering opinions. Elena spoke like a partner, not hired help.
"That's what I was thinking,"
he admitted. As they headed back toward the farmhouse, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Jim noticed how the light caught the silver threads in Elena's hair, how her shoulders carried their burden with a straightness he recognized. She'd learned, like he had, to bear weight without breaking.
"There's a room above the garage,"
he said awkwardly.
"If you need a place to stay, saves driving back to town every day."
Elena considered this.
"That's generous. I'll pay rent."
"No need. Just get the harvest in."
That evening, Jim sat alone at his kitchen table, picking at a microwave dinner while the house settled around him with its familiar creaks and sighs. Through the window, he could see a warm glow from the garage apartment. Elena had accepted his offer and moved her few belongings in with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown in the field. For the first time in months, the farm felt occupied by more than ghosts. He found himself thinking about the way Elena had handled the pepper plants, her fingers gentle but sure. Martha had possessed the same intuitive understanding of growing things, could sense when a plant needed water, or when fruit was ready for picking just by looking. That gift had extended to people too. She'd always known when Jim was wrestling with worry, when the weight of keeping the farm running pressed too heavily on his shoulders. Now the responsibility was his alone, and some days it threatened to crush him. Jim washed his plate and set it in the drying rack, one plate, 1 fork, 1 glass. The same lonely arithmetic that defined his meals. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the dark fields, their voices sharp and wild against the settled quiet of the farm. Tomorrow he would work beside Elena Morales, this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger. He would watch her move through his rows with her competent hands and steady gaze, and perhaps the harvest would be more than just another task to endure alone. He turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, but paused at the bottom step. Through the thin walls, he could hear the faint sound of someone moving around in the garage. Apartment footsteps on floorboards, the soft closing of a door, another person's presence on his land, another heartbeat in the Oklahoma night. The sound was almost like a promise. As Jim climbed the stairs to his empty bedroom, he wondered what Elena's story was, what had brought her to his farm at precisely the moment he needed help. Tomorrow, when the sun rose over the red earth and painted the pepper rose in gold, he would learn whether his instinct was right, whether she might be exactly what the land had been waiting for. The morning air carried the promise of heat, but at dawn the Oklahoma sky still held its cool blue clarity. Jim found Elena already in the pepper rows, her movements precise as she filled basket after basket with red and green pods. She worked with a rhythm he recognized, the steady pace of someone who understood that harvest time waited for no one. By 10 o'clock, they'd cleared half the southeast section. Jim's back ached, but he pushed through, matching Elena's relentless efficiency. She didn't speak much while working, but her presence felt solid, dependable. When she did offer direction, her judgment proved correct every time.
You've done this before?
Jim said during their water break. Elena wiped sweat from her forehead.
23 years picking peppers in New Mexico. 15 more doing vegetables in California.
She gestured toward his neat rows.
Your farm's well kept. Not all growers care like you do.
The compliment caught him off guard. He'd spent so many months questioning every decision, wondering if he was managing the land properly without Martha's guidance. Elena's approval felt like validation from someone who truly understood farming. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became brutal. Jim called for an extended lunch break, and they retreated to the shade of the farmhouse porch. Elena studied the peeling paint on the porch rails, the sagging screen door that Jim kept meaning to fix.
This place has good bones,
she said.
Just needs some attention.
Jim followed her gaze, seeing his home through fresh eyes. The farmhouse had sheltered 3 generations of Carters, but since Martha's death, he'd let maintenance slide. Grief had a way of making everything else seem unimportant.
My wife used to handle the upkeep,
he admitted.
I focused on the crops. She kept everything else running.
Elena nodded, understanding in her expression.
It's hard to do everything alone.
That evening, as Jim prepared to head inside for his usual solitary dinner of canned soup and crackers, Elena approached the back porch where he was washing his hands at the outdoor spigot.
I could cook tonight,
she offered.
If you have ingredients. As thanks for the room.
Jim hesitated. The kitchen had been Martha's domain. Since her death, he'd barely used it except to make coffee and heat simple meals. The idea of someone else cooking in that space felt like crossing an invisible line. But the alternative was another silent dinner, another evening of echoing emptiness.
There's not much in the pantry,
he said finally.
Let me see what I can work with.
Jim watched through the kitchen window. As Elena moved through the space with surprising familiarity, she opened cabinets, examined canned goods, found ingredients he'd forgotten he owned. From his small garden behind the house, she gathered tomatoes, onions, and herbs that had grown wild without Martha's careful tending. The smell that began to fill the farmhouse was unlike anything he'd experienced in months. Rich, complex, alive. It carried spices he couldn't identify, warmth that seemed to seep into the walls themselves. Jim found himself drawn to the kitchen doorway, watching Elena work. She chopped vegetables with swift, practiced strokes, added rice to a heavy pot, stirred in spices from small containers she'd produced from her own supplies. Steam rose from the pot, carrying scents that made his stomach clench with sudden hunger, not just for food, but for the simple pleasure of a meal prepared with care.
Smells good in here.
Elena glanced up from the stove.
Arroz con pollo. My grandmother's recipe. She taught me to cook with whatever was available.
When she served the dish, Jim sat at his kitchen table for the first time since Martha's funeral. The rice was perfectly seasoned, the chicken tender, the vegetables adding color and texture he'd forgotten food could have. Each bite carried layers of flavor that made his usual meals seem like cardboard.
He
paused, searching for words.
This is wonderful.
Elena smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her.
Food tastes better when it's shared.
As they ate, Jim found himself talking, really talking for the first time in months. He told Elena about the farm's history, how his grandfather had homesteaded the land in the 1920s, how his father had expanded the acreage and diversified the crops, how Jim had met Martha at a county fair and convinced her to leave town for the uncertain life of a farmer's wife.
She never regretted it.
He said.
Even during the bad years. Even when the bank threatened foreclosure. She believed in this place.
Elena listened without judgment, occasionally asking quiet questions that drew out more of his story. She told him fragments of her own history following harvest seasons across the Southwest, sending money to family in Mexico, the grinding uncertainty of seasonal work.
It's a hard life,
she said.
But honest. The land doesn't lie.
After dinner, Elena insisted on washing dishes. While Jim sat at the table, reluctant to break the spell of companionship, the kitchen felt alive again, purposeful. For the first time since Martha's death, the farmhouse seemed like a home rather than a mausoleum. But as Elena prepared to return to the garage apartment, doubt crept into Jim's mind. This felt too much like before, like the comfortable partnership he'd shared with Martha. It felt like betrayal to enjoy another woman's presence in his wife's kitchen, to find comfort in conversation and shared meals.
Elena,
he said as she reached for her jacket. She turned, waiting.
Tomorrow we should focus on getting the harvest finished. The weather forecast isn't looking good for next week.
Something flickered in her expression. Understanding, perhaps, or disappointment. She nodded once.
Of course. That's why I'm here.
After she left, Jim sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the lingering sense of Elena's cooking. The silence felt heavier now, more oppressive than before. He tasted something he'd thought was lost forever. Connection, comfort, the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone who understood his world. But wanting it felt like betrayal. Martha deserved better than to be replaced so easily, so quickly. The guilt gnawed at him as he turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to his empty bedroom. Outside, the September night carried the first hint of autumn's approach. Soon the growing season would end, and Elena would move on to other farms, other harvests. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it filled him with a hollowness that had nothing to do with hunger. Jim woke to the sound of truck engines rumbling in his driveway. Dawn light filtered through the bedroom curtains as he pulled on his work clothes, puzzled by the early arrival. The labor contractor wasn't due until 8, and Elena had said she'd start in the south field at sunrise. When he stepped onto the front porch, 3 men stood beside a battered pickup truck. The largest wore a straw cowboy hat and had the bearing of someone used to giving orders. Jim recognized him immediately, Dale Johnson, who owned the sprawling operation 5 miles down the county road.
Morning, Carter.
Johnson's voice carried false friendliness.
Looking for one of my workers. Woman named Elena Morales. Heard she's been staying here.
Jim's jaw tightened.
She's working my harvest. Under contract.
Johnson pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket.
Well, that's where you're wrong. She owes me money. Advance on wages from last season. Housing costs. Transportation fees.
He smiled, but his eyes stayed cold.
She can't work anywhere else until she settles up.
The 2 men flanking Johnson shifted closer. Neither looked like farmers. Their clothes were too clean, their hands too soft. They looked like the kind of men who collected debts and asked questions later.
How much does she supposedly owe?
Jim kept his voice level.
$1,200. Plus interest.
Johnson's smile widened.
Funny how expenses add up. Tool rental. Damaged equipment fees. Processing charges for paperwork.
Jim had heard stories about Johnson's operation. Workers arriving with promises of fair wages and decent housing, only to find themselves trapped in cycles of debt that never seemed to decrease. The county sheriff looked the other way, and most seasonal workers couldn't afford lawyers or didn't speak enough English to navigate the legal system.
Where is she?
Johnson scanned the farmhouse, the garage apartment, the outbuildings.
My boys here are getting impatient.
She's not here.
The lie came easily. Jim had seen Elena heading to the far field before dawn, but Johnson didn't need to know that. Johnson studied him for a long moment.
You know, Carter, interfering with business relationships can get complicated. Your farm's been struggling since your wife passed. Lot of pressure on a man your age, trying to manage alone.
His tone carried subtle threat.
Wouldn't want anything to happen to your equipment or your crops.
The implication hung in the morning air like smoke. Jim had invested everything in this harvest. One act of sabotage, damaged irrigation lines, contaminated soil, destroyed plants, could wipe him out financially.
Get off my property.
Johnson tipped his hat.
We'll be back. Elena can't hide forever. And when we find her, she's coming with us. That's just how business works around here.
The truck disappeared down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of red dust hanging in the still air. Jim stood on his porch, hands clenched, watching until they were completely out of sight. He found Elena in the pepper rows, working with the focused intensity of someone trying to lose herself in physical labor. She looked up when he approached, and he saw she'd heard the truck engines.
They came looking for you.
Her face went very still.
Dale Johnson.
It wasn't a question. Jim nodded, studying her expression. The confident, self-assured woman he'd come to respect looked suddenly fragile, like prey that had been running for too long.
He says you owe him money.
Elena straightened, wiping dirt from her hands.
I worked his farm last fall. Picked chilies for 6 weeks. When payday came, he started adding fees. Claimed I damaged equipment I'd never touched. Said I owed for housing in a trailer with no heat and holes in the roof.
Her voice carried quiet anger.
By the time he finished calculating, I owed more than I'd earned.
That's theft.
That's business. His business.
Elena resumed picking, her movements sharp with frustration.
He does it to workers who can't fight back. People with no legal status, no English, no money for lawyers. Creates debt that never goes away.
Jim watched her work, seeing the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the road.
Why didn't you tell me?
Because you do exactly what you're thinking of doing now. Try to help.
Elena met his eyes.
And Johnson has connections. County officials who owe him favors. Sheriff's department that looks the other way. You're one man with a small farm. He can destroy you.
The weight of that truth settled between them. Jim had built his life on the principle that hard work and fair dealing would see him through any challenge. But Johnson operated by different rules that turned human desperation into profit.
There has to be something we can do. Legal aid society, maybe. Or...
I've tried.
Elena's voice cut through his suggestions.
Systems designed to protect people like Johnson. Workers like me are disposable.
They worked in silence for the next hour, the pepper harvest continuing around the crisis that threatened to end it. Jim's mind raced through possibilities, each one crashing against the reality of Johnson's power and connections. A small farmer couldn't challenge the county's largest agricultural operation, not without proof and resources Jim didn't have. Around noon, Elena stopped working and faced him directly.
I should leave. Tonight, before he comes back with more men. Find work in another county, or another state.
Her words came out flat, resigned.
It's what I always do. Keep moving, stay ahead of trouble.
And spend the rest of your life running?
Elena shrugged, but Jim caught the flash of pain in her eyes.
Better than getting you mixed up in this. You don't deserve to lose everything because you tried to help me.
Jim looked across his pepper fields, neat rows representing months of planning, planting, and cultivation. The harvest was half finished. Without Elena's expertise, he might lose a significant portion of the crop, but the economic concern felt secondary to something deeper. For 2 days, Elena had brought life back to his farm. Her competence, her presence, her cooking, all of it had reminded him what it felt like to share purpose with another person. The thought of watching her disappear into another cycle of exploitation made his chest tighten with anger.
What if you didn't run this time?
Elena stared at him.
Jim, you don't understand what you're suggesting.
Maybe I don't. But I understand that Johnson's counting on you being too scared to fight back. He's counting on people like me being too comfortable to get involved.
Jim pulled off his work gloves, looking down at his calloused hands.
My whole life I've minded my own business, focused on my farm, my family, my problems. Maybe it's time I tried something different.
He'll crush you.
Maybe. Or maybe there are more people tired of his methods than he realizes.
Jim met her gaze.
You said you've been running for 23 years. How's that working out for you?
Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked across the pepper fields, then toward the farmhouse where she'd cooked dinner the night before, then back to Jim's face. When she spoke, her voice carried a tremor of something Jim couldn't quite identify, fear, maybe, or hope.
If we do this, if we try to fight him, there's no going back. He won't just take it out on me. He'll come after you, your farm, everything you've built here.
Jim nodded slowly. The smart thing would be to let Elena disappear into the night, to finish his harvest alone, to protect the life he'd spent 40 years building. The safe thing would be to mind his own business. But some battles, he was beginning to understand, were worth the risk of losing everything. The weather radio crackled at 3 in the afternoon, its mechanical voice slicing through the thick, breathless air. Jim straightened from the pepper rows, sweat dripping, as the announcement warned of rotation, hail, and high winds. Elena shaded her eyes, watching the horizon bruise green.
We'd better tie things down,
she said, voice already taut with urgency. They worked side by side, hauling tarps, lashing tools. The air grew heavier, the silence between thunderclaps stretching until it hummed. By the time the sirens wailed, they were already running for the storm cellar, wind clawing at their clothes. The old wooden doors groaned shut above them, sealing them in damp darkness. The bulb flickered, then died. Jim's flashlight threw shaky circles across earth walls lined with jars. Dust and mildew filled the air, yet over it he caught the faint perfume of Elena's hair. Something clean and floral that didn't belong in this underground gloom.
How long?
She whispered, lowering herself onto a crate.
Could be hours.
Her eyes glimmered in the weak beam. He saw the tension there, the ache she carried from years of moving on, never settling. And suddenly she slid closer, her knee brushing his. The touch was small but deliberate.
I've been thinking,
she murmured, voice nearly lost in the storm's roar.
Maybe it's time I stopped running.
A gust rattled the doors above, dust falling like ash. Instinct pulled them nearer, shoulder to shoulder. He felt her warmth seep into him, her breath feathering his cheek. Lightning flared and for an instant he saw her face, unguarded, lips parted. His hand found hers. She didn't withdraw. Instead, her fingers twined, clinging as if the storm could tear them apart. The first kiss was hesitant, their lips brushing, then pressing with growing certainty. Her breath hitched, and when he cupped her cheek, her skin felt soft, trembling. She leaned into him, her hair brushing his jaw, damp strands clinging. His thumb slid down, grazing the hollow of her throat. Another button gave way beneath his calloused fingers, then another, until the fabric loosened, revealing pale skin glistening with sweat. She shivered as the cool air kissed her exposed collarbone. Her hand moved too, fumbling at his shirt, tugging until the buttons strained. She pushed the fabric back, palms exploring the firm lines of his chest, the rise and fall with each ragged breath. When her fingers slipped lower, to the leather of his belt, he caught her wrist briefly, meeting her eyes. She didn't flinch. The storm growled above, answering for them both. Her skirt rode up as she shifted onto his lap, thighs tightening around his hips. He felt the heat of her body through thin fabric, her curves pressing into him. His hand slid over her back, down to her waist, then lower, following the arc of her hips. She arched toward him, blouse falling open, her chest against his, full and urgent. They moved with a rhythm half born of instinct, half forged by hunger long denied. His mouth found her neck, the hollow of her shoulder, tasting salt and skin. She gasped, nails digging into his shoulders, pulling him closer. Their hips pressed, rocked, found a cadence that matched the thunder rolling overhead. Every shift of her body made the cellar creak, every gasp a counterpoint to the storm's howl. The air was thick with heat, sweat, and the musk of desire. Her hair clung damp to her temples. His breath was rough in her ear. Clothes bunched, slid, fell aside in the half-dark, until skin met skin, slick and trembling. The final barrier gone, she yielded fully, drawing him into her with a low cry swallowed by thunder. Their bodies collided and merged, the cellar floor unforgiving beneath them, yet forgotten as waves of need overtook them. Movements quickened, deepened, until storm and passion became indistinguishable. When release came, it tore through them like lightning splitting sky, blinding, violent, and then quiet. For a long moment they lay tangled, his hands smoothing the curve of her back, her lips brushing sweat from his shoulder. Outside, the tornado moved on, its rage spent. Rain softened the night. Inside, silence swelled with something more dangerous than fear, the fragile beginning of belonging. Jim opened the doors at last. The farm still stood, battered but upright. Elena stepped beside him, blouse clinging damp to her skin, hair wild, her smile weary but luminous.
Tomorrow,
He said, voice raw.
we finish the harvest and face Johnson
She touched his cheek, eyes steady.
together.
As they walked toward the farmhouse, Jim realized the storm had taken more than its toll on the land. It had also swept away the distance between them, leaving in its wake a bond fragile yet undeniable, born of fury, need, and the fragile courage to belong. The morning after the storm dawned clear and cool, with that crystalline quality that only comes after violent weather has scrubbed the sky clean. Jim found Elena already in the kitchen when he came downstairs, coffee brewing and eggs sizzling in the cast iron pan that had been Martha's favorite.
Thought we could use a good breakfast before we finish the harvest.
She said without turning around. Jim poured himself coffee and stood at the window, looking out over his pepper fields. The storm had scattered debris across the rows, but the plants themselves had survived. In the distance, he could see Johnson's operation, massive green buildings and industrial equipment that dwarfed Jim's modest farm.
You sure about this?
He asked.
Once we take a stand against Johnson, there's no going back to the way things were.
Elena set a plate in front of him, eggs over easy, just the way Martha used to make them.
The way things wasn't working for either of us.
They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes between people who have moved past the need to fill every moment with words. Through the kitchen window, the October light slanted golden across the farmyard, painting everything with the soft glow of autumn. After breakfast, they returned to the pepper fields. The harvest was nearly complete, just 2 more rows in the northwest section. Elena worked with the same steady efficiency she'd shown from the first day, but now there was something different in her movements. Purpose, maybe, or belonging.
My husband used to say that peppers were like people.
She said as they filled basket after basket with the final crop.
Some are mild, some are hot, but they all need the same things to grow. Good soil, enough water, someone who cares.
Jim paused in his picking. In 3 days, Elena had mentioned her late husband only once before, and then just briefly.
How long were you married?
15 years. He died in an accident at a construction site in Phoenix.
Elena's voice stayed steady, but Jim heard the old grief underneath.
That's when the debts started. Medical bills, funeral costs. Predators like Johnson who prey on people with nowhere else to turn.
They worked through the morning, the last of the peppers disappearing into baskets and crates. By noon, the harvest was complete. Jim stood at the edge of his field, looking over the neat rows of picked plants, feeling the satisfaction that came with bringing in a successful crop.
We did good work,
Elena said, wiping her hands on a towel.
We did.
That afternoon, a truck pulled into the farmyard. Not Johnson's battered pickup, but a newer vehicle with the logo of the County Agricultural Extension Office on the door. A woman in her 40s stepped out, clipboard in hand and official bearing.
Mr. Carter, I'm Sarah Williams from the Extension Office. We've received some complaints about labor practices in the county. Thought I'd stop by and see how your harvest went.
Jim glanced at Elena, who had gone very still beside him.
Complaints?
Anonymous reports about wage theft, unsafe working conditions, that sort of thing. The state labor department is getting involved.
Williams looked between Jim and Elena.
We're documenting working conditions on all the farms in the county, making sure everyone follows proper procedures.
Elena stepped forward.
I'm Elena Morales. I've been working Mr. Carter's harvest. He's treated me fairly, paid what he promised, provided decent housing.
Williams made notes on her clipboard.
Good to hear. We're also looking into some specific allegations against Johnson Farms. Debt peonage, mostly. Workers trapped by fake charges and inflated fees.
She looked directly at Elena.
If you have any information about illegal labor practices, now would be a good time to share it.
For a moment, Elena didn't respond. Then she began to speak, quietly but clearly, about her experience at Johnson's farm.
The fabricated damages, the impossible fees, the cycle of debt that kept workers trapped.
Williams wrote steadily, asking occasional questions but mostly listening.
This is exactly what we need.
Williams said when Elena finished.
We've got similar stories from other workers, but most are too scared to go on record. Your testimony, combined with the others, should be enough for the state to take action.
After Williams left, Jim and Elena sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. The completed harvest was loaded in Jim's truck, ready for tomorrow's trip to the processing plant. The immediate crisis was over.
I never thought I'd see Johnson held accountable.
Elena said.
Men like him usually get away with everything. Maybe things are changing. Maybe people are finally tired of looking the other way.
Elena was quiet for a while, rocking gently in Martha's old porch chair.
When I first came here, I thought I was just taking another temporary job. One more farm, one more season.
What changed?
You did.
She looked at him directly.
You treated me like I mattered. Like my work had value beyond just what you could pay me. I'd forgotten what that felt like.
Jim felt heat rise in his face. Compliments had always made him uncomfortable, but Elena's words carried weight because they came from someone who had learned to measure people by their actions rather than their promises.
You brought this place back to life,
he said.
I was just going through the motions after Martha died. Working the farm because I didn't know what else to do. You reminded me why it all matters.
The evening air was cooling, carrying the scent of harvested fields and the promise of changing seasons. In a few weeks, the first frost would come, and the growing season would end. But instead of facing another winter alone, Jim found himself making different plans.
I've been thinking,
he said carefully,
about next year's planting. The farm could support more than just peppers. Maybe some tomatoes, squash, green beans. But it would take 2 people to manage that much crop.
Elena smiled, understanding the invitation without needing it spelled out completely.
I've been thinking too, about staying in one place long enough to plant a garden. To see it grow from seeds to harvest.
The garage apartment gets cold in winter. But there's a spare bedroom in the house. If you wanted,
I'd like that.
They sat together as darkness settled over the farm, comfortable in each other's presence, and in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges but also new possibilities. The red Oklahoma soil that had been Jim's anchor for 40 years would now be shared ground, tended by 2 pairs of hands instead of one.
Martha would have liked you,
Jim said eventually.
I think I would have liked her too.
Later that evening, as Elena prepared for what might be her last night in the garage apartment, she looked through the small window toward the farmhouse. Light glowed warmly in the kitchen windows, and she could see Jim moving around inside, probably making his evening coffee and settling in with the farm journals he liked to read before bed. Tomorrow they would take the peppers to market, collect payment for the harvest, and begin planning for the future. It wouldn't be easy, farming never was. But for the first time in years, Elena felt the particular hope that comes from knowing you have a place to stay, work that matters, and someone who values both your effort and your company. The October stars were brilliant in the clear sky, scattered like seeds across the darkness. Soon she would plant her own seeds in Oklahoma soil, tend her own garden, help bring new life from the red earth that had already given her more than she had dared to hope for.